Good morning. Welcome to the Unity Spiritual Center on a cold, cold day. Somebody told me it's what, 24 degrees outside?
Yeah, it was 24 when we came in.
24, which is exciting. Our conversation today is we live in a sea of inexhaustible substance, which is directly out of this book, Dynamics for Living by Charles Fillmore. And with all the conversations about lack and all the problems we're experiencing in our culture, I thought it'd be good to talk about prosperity this morning. Anybody agree?
Yes.
Yes.
Good idea.
Yes.
And what I zeroed in on, and what's interesting for me, is the beginning of the Unity organization back in, I think 1890, something like that. And it started with Myrtle Fillmore, his wife. And Myrtle Fillmore attended a class by E.B. Weeks, who was a spiritual guru at that time, if I can use that terminology. And he said something, and what he said was, as a child of God, you do not inherit disease. And I'll say that again. As a child of God, you do not inherit disease. And Myrtle had been diagnosed with, I think they called it pleurisy at that time, and told she had 6 months to live. And she heard that affirmation, and the conversation was, you become what you speak, you become what you think. And that was the crux of what E.B. Wicks was teaching. And she took that in, and she began using that affirmation over and over and over and over again. And I believe it was like 30 years later she died. So an amazing, amazing story of healing. And it's also a conversation that opens the door to the substance of the universe, okay? So we live in a sea of inexhaustible substance. Now the idea is that there's an energy for good in the universe. And the energy itself we'll call God, or whatever we choose to. However, that energy is ever present under all conditions, under all circumstances. It's interesting that now science is saying that there's the energy within the very atoms. Anybody familiar with the idea of the atom bomb? Which is releasing the energy that is in the atom. And what's interesting is what Charles Fillmore says. Now, a lot of people, one of the ideas, Charles used the ideas from Myrtle. And he got really curious about how she healed herself. And he started studying all the religions of the world, spent time getting involved in what created her healing. So his work started after Myrtle showed him how through her healing, okay? So, and this is what he says, and I want to break this down. He says, the idea behind prosperity is lose all thoughts of lack and lay hold of thoughts of plenty. Then he says, see the abundance of all good things. So what he's saying is exactly what Myrtle was saying when she decided that as a child of God, she did not inherit disease. Okay? Now, that's an idea to have in your mind. So we live in a very sea of inexhaustible substance, which is the quote that I used, ready to come into manifestation when molded by our thought. So around us is the ether. Now, the ancients, they said that the elements of the world are earth, air, fire, and water. And then they added the fifth one, ethers, which is we call the substance or the energy that's all around us. And the energy is inexhaustible. It's like the ocean. The ocean is everywhere present. Anybody agree you can't drink the ocean? And the ocean is there all the time. And if you take a bucket out of it, or a ton out of it, or 10 gallons, whatever, there's still plenty left. So it's a metaphor for the possibility of producing what we need within our daily life. So the idea here is there's a substance in the universe that you can call the ethers or the very consciousness of God, and it's up to us what we do with it. So there's an inexhaustible supply of that good, and controlled by our thinking and the words we speak. So, what happens when we take this inexhaustible substance, and if we're not thinking for the highest and best, what happens? And that's all of a sudden I realized that. It's like there's an inexhaustible gold mine that's possible for us if we have the consciousness of gold mines. That makes any sense. So the human beings, we have forgotten who we are, and we're in the process of remembering who we are, and we go back to Genesis 1:27 where it says we're created in the image and after the likeness of God. So if we're created like that, how can God have disease? You know, how can God have lack? How can God have problems? How can God, see, that's anybody agree that you can't even consider God having anything other than perfection, joy, peace, and happiness. So if you look at it realistically and look at it with contemplation, there is no way that God created us with disease, with lack, with all the problems. So who created the problems? It says, lose all thoughts of lack and lay hold of thoughts of plenty. So when we hold thoughts of lack, what happens? Lack occurs. Now, I used to think that it was a direct. In other words, if I think about this, it's going to happen. One of the jokes that somebody told one time was, you know, when he heard whatever you think about, you become. And the little boy started screaming, running out because he didn't want to be a girl. Okay. And that's good. But the idea is consciousness. And what I'm realizing is thoughts, love thoughts create conversations of love and what is love. Okay? Fear thoughts, and we're told that there's only two thoughts, a thought of fear, a thought of love. So love thoughts create all the good that we need, which is abundance, health, happiness, relationships, and is fear thoughts that create the suffering and problems in our life. Now, everybody has their own level of suffering. Some people have a money suffering, other people have disease, gout, or back problems, and we all create our own suffering over with fear thoughts. And so what is a thought of abundance? Somebody else? For me, it's plenty to eat. It's health, happiness. Okay? And so it's our own thinking that creates the world we live in. And what surprised me is the whole unity movement is based upon Myrtle doing that and reaching the point where I'm a child of God, therefore I cannot inherit disease, and she healed herself. Now, if that's true overall as a human being, each one of us has that capability. So I can take the formula as a child of God. Now, who's a child of God? Each one of us, right? So, wherever I find myself in, God created only good. So who created other than good? And the only intermediary that messes things up is me, or the consciousness of the human being. And it's a very interesting, it's the same message over and over again, but it keeps coming through in different ways. Jesus said in his words, you are the light of the world. Know ye not that these things I do, you shall do it in the greater things. So everywhere is all this conversation, but yet all we have to do really is stop and think about it, is I'm a child of God. And that's the first step. I have to accept that as I'm a child of God, and as a child of God, therefore I cannot inherit anything from God other than good. It's an impossibility if I'm looking at it from a reasonable position. Okay? Now, what's interesting, it's kind of like that's all I have to say this morning, because it's so simple. Okay? And we have a tendency to want to complicate things. But yet the kingdom of heaven is within. It's the Father's good pleasure to give us the kingdom. And you go over into any conversation, it's the same thing over and over and again. So, I am, you are, we are, child of God. Okay? Is anybody created other than as a child of God? No. Therefore, I do not inherit any suffering or any issues. And I inherit only the good in life. And that's a general statement which covers everything. I'm realizing that divine order is the conversation of the universe. And if you really look at it, it's crazy. Because the sun comes up every morning, and they have tables on when the sun is going to come up for the next 100 years.
Or when the snow's going to come in and the cold in
The snow's going to
Texas.
come in. The seasonal, and the seasonal variations, just to keep us excited. Okay? But yet everything is in an order. Everything works like clockwork. Can you imagine the sun stopping? Now the sun doesn't stop, and the sun doesn't go around us, we go around the sun. So a lot of times our thinking is not within what is a natural cycle or a Christ cycle, if I use that terminology. However, it's always, the kingdom of heaven is within, it's always perfect, and the only thing that creates imperfection is my thinking, which is crazy. Now, you want to add?
No, I just was thinking about how they predicted it's going to be cold.
It's really interesting to me. I was watching, it's like right now the big fear is for global warming. And the human thinking is creating that issue of fear. In other words, the way we're controlled is through fear. Did everybody get that? And the way we're controlled is creating fear about a certain thing. So when we create that fear, what happens? The thing that fear is not going to upon me. So we are being controlled on a human level, but behind everything is this natural, spiritual level, which is God's is perfection. Okay?
And sometimes the funny part is that we don't even know it. It's our subconscious acting out.
Well, it's interesting for me right now because the world is going into a turmoil, in my opinion, or is in a turmoil. Okay. Right. I don't want to get too much into this on a political basis, but the United States is overspending itself. We can no longer afford it. So everybody can understand that the debt on our national, the interest on our national debt is almost $1 trillion a year, just on the debt. Okay? So what is happening? Inflation happening. Now, they're worried about getting it down, but there's, again, basic economics is saying it's not going to work. Okay? And we're all looking around wondering, okay, what's next? And the whole idea behind this is the kingdom of heaven is within. It's the Father's good pleasure to give us the kingdom. So no matter what, something will come out of that. Because we are here to thrive. The word thrive is an important spiritual term. And I am here to thrive, you're here to thrive. But the world around us isn't agreeing with that. And we've got a lot of people that really don't understand economics. They're running things, okay? Now, you're starting to get a feel for where I'm thinking, but the idea behind this whole thing is the kingdom of heaven is within, and we have control over what happens in our life. And the big thing is we think we have control in the material way, but we have control in the spiritual way, seeing only good. Seeing only good.
When I was asking you some questions this week, the difficult thing, I think, is that if we can do what you're saying, we will be okay. And what happens to others, we just have to watch.
I'm going back to the healing of Jesus that Jesus did. A lot of times he had to let people go. In other words, he asked people, do you believe? And then the healing occurred. Or the widows and the oil, the jug that became pouring oil out forever and ever. In other words, there's no limit. What he did was he told her to go get vessels from her neighbors. And she had this little pot of oil, and he told her to get other pots together because she could pour out oil until the belief ended. In other words, the oil pouring out of this little jug stopped when she reached the point of how many jugs she had accumulated, which is called faith. So it's an example of how the mind works in a spiritual way. Okay? Very interesting conversation. You're asking me all kinds of questions.
I'm trying to keep you talking.
I reached a point where I can't change people. All I can do is share an idea that if it hits into your consciousness and you decide, okay, I'm going to do what's necessary to follow this path, that's up to you. It's not up to me. Sometimes reaching the point of getting tired of saying the same thing over and over and over again. Okay? Because the answers are there. They've been there for years. You go back. Anne is a very, very interesting example. And the reason I say that, she's studied mermaids, she's done all this stuff, and then she's gotten women together from all over this area, and she has done the work. And Anne is a real example of overcoming a health problem. Anybody know what she's been through? It's absolutely amazing. She really, I'm not going to go there, but she's done a wonderful job in following the work and sharing the work with others. So it's a conversation of you believe it or you don't. And what I say, or what we say here, is good. However, it's up to the individual or people out on the camera out here or whatever it is to do something, because it doesn't happen if you don't change your consciousness. And the only way to change consciousness is spaced repetition through affirmations, prayer, meditation, and study with others thinking the same way. Because if you're hanging out with people that are negative, they're bringing you down rather than bringing you up. And we're right back to the conversation that we have adders in life or we have takers in life. And it's hanging around with the adders that add to the consciousness. So that's pretty much finished for that time.
Well, I look at it as that we don't try to change people, we teach people. My job is to teach. And
Share ideas.
And if you want to take it, fine. If you don't, that's also fine.
And it's interesting.
But I don't try to change your mind. I've tried with MJ for 30 years. Still can't change her mind. So.
That's why she's on our team now.
That's right.
It's interesting. Our daughter, Tracy, she builds a fictitious idea of who would be on her team. And she has selected some of you in here because you do things. Anybody agree when it comes to a problem, people that do things get things done? And then other people run and hide. I don't want people around me that run and hide, and that's her idea, okay? And it's taking responsibility for who I am. And once you understand the spiritual idea that the kingdom of heaven is within, and I am responsible for things that happen in my life, not somebody else. So I had to stop blaming my mother and the way she raised me. Okay? I had to stop blaming other people in my life, and I had to accept responsibility for who I am. And I was given the opportunity to look at, in a spiritual way, how to become that individual that I was meant to be. See, the original creation, you are the original creation, and you are still the original creation. And it's up to us what we do with the gifts we've been given in that creation. Because when you go back to the creation story, now it's a story. We really don't know. It's a metaphor. But the truth is, if we're really created in the image and the likeness of God, who created us? Because we're a creator and we're creating our life. And the only difference between somebody that is doing this and being happy and harmonic and healthy is the individual that thinks that way and creates those images in their mind. It's interesting, the quantum physics in the idea that as a person views things as the way they occur. So things are changing, things are happening. Madeline and I had a long conversation yesterday. Anybody understand the world is changing dramatically?
I don't want it.
I was explaining what's happening. The AI and that whole environment is shifting things dramatically. Right now, AI can produce legal opinions faster than 10 or 15 lawyers at the top. In other words, they are now looking at AI, and AI is telling people the legal contract, and they're creating it faster. Everybody understand that we are going to be living with self-driving cars. And tell me what's going to change. You have no need for garages because you don't have a car. Insurance is not a problem because we don't have accidents, and it's not your problem. Okay? You don't have anything to take care of because it's going to be a subscription. Now, they are having problems with self-driving. Everybody agree?
Oh, yeah.
Okay? And how does this thing learn? How do we as human beings learn? Through lessons, through mistakes. So every mistake that occurs with a self-driving car, the programs now are automatically changing to overcome that problem. Okay? That's why you're hearing the diagnosis on the medical level is quicker than a doctor who's been around for 20, 30 years. Because the computer goes way out and comes up with all the different possibilities. So things are going to be changing dramatically. And it's happening faster now than it has ever happened. So we are going into a world where we literally don't have to work, and machines are going to be doing the work. Now, I'm being way out, I agree with you. But the thing to understand is we are in a change. And consciousness is what's going to drive us into the future. There are more religious ideas than there have ever been. Okay? Does anybody understand how many Christian doctrines there are in the United States? I'm told 1,700 different churches. Okay? And why is that happening? Because people look over here and they say, well, I don't like this part, but I'm going to do this part. So it's the human brain creating problems. And we are shifting in our consciousness. Okay, now how did I get over here? You started it.
It's my fault. Tommy did it.
You did.
Tommy did. Well, it's a light bulb. Truthfully, things are changing. Look at the political structure we're dealing with. We've got more people with more ideas than has ever occurred. And people are being more and more vocal with crazy ideas, in my opinion, because I don't understand how they think. Okay? And does that matter? No. See, it's becoming more and more open to the possibilities of consciousness, and that's changing. Okay? Now, I'm not sure I can change genders, okay? But all these things are occurring, and they're part of this new conversation, whatever you want to call it. So when we say there's a new world coming, it is here. And the key to it is, what do I believe, and what am I creating through my consciousness? And what is the true harmony in life? Where is it? And how come some people can amass huge fortunes and somebody else is broke and living homeless? There's got to be a reason for that, and it's not outside, it's within. So it's the within that I have to look at, not the outside. And I've spoken too much at this point in time, so. and now you have an opportunity. I haven't shared a lot of this stuff, but that's where we're going. Okay? I'm finished. I'm done. Bye.